Good afternoon. So I'm sorry, but I'm gonna use this podium. It's easier for me to keep my papers in front of me and do that. Thanks, Gary, very much. I am really happy to be here. Um, it was a great morning. I learned a ton, and that's one of the tests I always make or give myself about why I would go one place or another. So this is great. So, what compels me to be here today? It's not only this wonderful event, although that accounts for a whole lot of my giddy up, but it's also an opportunity to pay special tribute to the amazing work going on in Kentucky. This comes up all the time, and it's been referred to already this morning as I hope you all know how people from throughout the country are watching Kentucky move for move for move. It's really true. Now I'm going to go back through a little of my background, just as Gary's already teased it up, just to make my Kentucky connections that much more vivid. So I was a student journalist. Oh wait, no, let me go back. I'm a proud product of Ballard High School in Louisville. I'm a 1973 graduate. Do the math. I am old. And I have two meaningful degrees from the University of Kentucky, one in journalism and one in political science. So even as a student journalist at the University of Kentucky, and even to some degree in high school, I was drawn to education reporting. In fact, I probably met some of you. I was trying to look at name tags, and there are a couple people who reintroduced themselves to me when I was covering the legislature and the Kentucky higher ed system when I was a student at UK. Like the wonk in waiting that I was, and I am wonky, I decided to assign myself the higher education beat while I was at the Kernel. The big story at the time, if you all remember this, I was mainly covering the public system. Was remember that all those fights over missions and differentiated mission statements? That's what I thought. That was great. That really excited me. It was heady stuff for a budding edu nerd. As Gary said, I next went to the Courier-Journal. I hadn't even graduated from college when they offered me a job. And because I'd been an intern, they hired me. After my internship, I did go back and get my degree, or degrees. So you all can rest assured I persisted. And I did spend nearly a decade there covering, virtually all of it for the part of the paper that covered the whole state. And this is where I can do my Kentucky accent, from Paducah to Pikeville. I have a bit of a backward career in that I did start it as an editor, first as a copy editor and then as an assistant regional editor. And again, as Gary said, I ended up, for personal reasons and because a mentor pushed me, decided I better get the punch on my ticket that showed that I could do reporting. One of my high points of my time at the CJ was helping to edit the exhaustive series the paper ran in 1984 on the state's educational shortcomings. I couldn't have asked for a better beginning to my career, and I really do look back fondly on those years, both what they meant for me as in my own professional development as a public policy journalist, but also what they portended for the amazing things that were going to go on to improve schools in Kentucky and then throughout the nation. In 1986, within a month of the announcement that the Courier-Journal would be sold, I pulled up stakes from Louisville and moved to Washington to help edit a relatively new publication called Education Week. As I keep referring, because I'm sorry if I'm redundant, but except for the 2-year detour I took to work at the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching, I've been at EdWeek ever since. I will say, because you guys are educators, I'm the ghostwriter of a couple of books that came out under Ernie Boyer's name called The Early Years in the Basic School. So if that makes any connection, while I was at Carnegie. I also can't help but share one other of my Kentucky connections, and one of the big reasons I think I'm here today, and that's one Bob Sexton. How many of you know Bob? Knew Bob? Great. I knew Bob a very long time. We first met in 1973 when I was a 17-year-old first semester know-nothing college freshman. I did a story for the Kernel on Dr. Robert F. Sexton's, he was the newish head of something called the Office of Experiential Education. My article on Bob's work to connect students with the real world was one of my first stories to appear in the Kernel. It was 10 inches long. I was very excited. As Bob reminded me several times, he thought the article was okay enough. It was the headline that he had an issue with. The headline said something like, "Students get credit for ditching class." Oops. It was an early lesson for me, certainly, and I think for him that headlines are written by somebody other than the reporters, right? You all have had experience with that, I'm sure. So over the next 37 years, our professional lives continued to repeatedly and significantly intersected and intertwined. First during my years as a reporter at the Courier-Journal, and then as editor of Education Week. And of course, and I really want to pay tribute to this, it was Bob's tenure as the nation's single best example of mobilizing citizen engagement in the push for better schools that partly kept Kentucky and his work in the spotlight. Plus, beginning in 1992 and until his death in 2010, Bob was a devoted member of the Editorial Projects and Education Board. That's the umbrella organization over Education Week and edweek.org. We're a nonprofit, by the way. So yes, that made Bob my boss when all was finally said and done. So I have kind of hard stops at places when I'm going to be yakking here. Here's one of them. So speaking in the most general terms, Kentucky School Improvement story and the story of the Pritchard's Committee role in the tale more specifically has been a touchstone for me for nearly 3 decades. For more than 25 years, Kentucky has been a national beacon for education reform and all the hard work that it takes to stick with the work. After languishing so many years at the bottom of the educational heap, we heard reference to Mississippi earlier today. I remember those times. Kentucky or Tennessee or Mississippi or Kentucky, one or the other was at the bottom. Kentucky has attained a very special stature in the school improvement community and has been rightly recognized as a standard bearer for systemic change. If you follow the timeline of the Kentucky story, you'll see it mirrored and in many cases helped to shape school improvement efforts across the nation. But what makes Kentucky's story so instructive, I think, is the intentional way that the state harnessed public sentiment. The way it did not overlook this resource of the civic kind of capacity. It nurtured it and it translated it into action. Over the years, I've consistently and proudly credited the combo of heightened public will, dedicated political support, and focused media attention, Art Jester, for ensuring that Kentucky would, way back in the 80s, take a courageous step to improve its schools. But its dedication to the long view, a keen focus and dogged perseverance over the past 2 decades plus that have really made the difference. Sure, there have been many sprints to run along the way, but you all have known it's been a marathon. And I do want to, I was looking at some information before I came, and the 86% graduation rate and the other kinds of progress that you guys have been able to clock is just, it's an amazing story that this work has continued and continued to reap benefits. So at the risk of sounding just a little bit full of myself, I think my 24-year history at Education Week as the editor has given me a catbird seat to gain some perspective on K-12 education and how we've gotten to where we are today across the nation. I don't pretend to be able to talk specifically about what you guys do day in and day out, except just, I hope, provide some helpful frames to that might inform your work or whatever. So by definition, as a journalist, I'm a chronicler, I'm a synthesizer, I'm a documenter, and I'm an analyzer. of the state of play in pre-collegiate education and the transition that follows, whether that be to post-secondary education or gainful employment in the workplace. In other words, this phrase has already come up today. I fully acknowledge I'm a mile wide and an inch deep. Hey, that's like the old standards, right? And now a disclaimer. As the editor of Ed Week, I'm pretty careful in forums like this one not to go spouting my mouth off too much. And then here's where I always wink, right? The newspaper, which is in the early weeks of its 33rd year, has gained its stature as an independent, objective chronicler of K-12 education by carefully preserving its integrity, independence, and credibility. And I do take that very seriously. As a journalist, I'm not supposed to have opinions, right? Not so much. I have no trouble arguing that journalists should pull back from their horse race coverage of issues and take a far more active role in elevating issues of import in the public world. I think journalists should be catalysts for reinvigoration of civic life, for community improvement, and for the political empowerment of its citizens. I know it's all quite lofty. I would argue that good journalism has always had as its goal the betterment of society, and I do have a point of view. It's that this country deserves better schools, that every child deserves a better opportunity, and that we need to ensure high-quality teachers, high-quality curriculum and other materials, and high-quality resources otherwise to support all kids and to improve their outcomes. So that's all a big setup. The forums like this certainly give me a chance to talk somewhat generally about Ed Week, and of course I also want to take a few minutes to connect some dots for you all around the issues you most passionately care about. But first, I've taken to opening talks like this by talking about what a wacky time it is to be in media and journalism and publishing. Talk about change, talk about disruption. Education Week and EPE operate smack in the middle of a news and media industry confronted by daunting challenges, and we're trying to navigate this uncharted path from print to digital publishing. It's daunting in two regards. In terms of the mission, we're dedicated to serving, and we do, as a nonprofit and otherwise, have a mission. And it's really daunting in terms of evolving our business model so that we can live another day to fulfill our mission, and you get the drift of that. Two recent recessions, one in 2001 and one in 2008, and you all remember the impact those had on your own work, conspired to decimate media companies' bottom lines and to change forever the way we do business. As a result, the worlds of journalism and publishing have been emphatically disrupted, and that's where I'm going with this, over the past decade. In fact, it wouldn't be too dramatic to say that in 2008, I wasn't sure if Education Week was going to make it. We were readying scenarios where we were going to have to, in essence, dismount or close it down. The internet, and more recently social media, have completely changed the way people get their news and information. As Vivian Schiller, she was formerly of the New York Times, and National Public Radio, and now she's at NBC News. I love Diet Dew. Whoever had this on the back, even if it gives me a little. So this is a quote from Vivian. If you don't disrupt yourself, somebody's going to disrupt you. Words to live by, I'd say. The competition is coming at us from all sides, whether you're in the education sector, whether you're in the publishing field, and it's more intense today than it was even, I would say, a couple years ago. At EPE, it's now a given that disruption is built into our jobs. By definition, we know that means we need to deliberately focus on change, to embrace experimentation, and to recalibrate on the fly. All themes we've heard throughout the day today. That means we've become one with the entrepreneurial mentality, intent on identifying the best of what works, and then working to turn it into something even better. Again, I really applaud the work I was hearing this morning that's along this same vein, so I hope I'm not being redundant. What helps separate us from the pack, because our story is somewhat special in the world of publishing, in that we not only survived, we're actually now thriving. In short, I think it's about having a vision, supporting entrepreneurial leadership and employees, and investing, even when times were and are tough. So at a more granular level, we are also dedicated to the in-the-weeds use of analytics and metrics and data to inform our decision-making and project and product development. We are proponents of instituting more efficient and productive processes and procedures. Are you yawning? I'm sorry. And of course it means we're enthusiastic adopters of new technology tools and platforms. Today, EPE has reached the point where non-print activities, this is one gauge of how you do as a publisher, non-print is generating 60% of our revenue. The average in the publishing world is less than 20% still coming from print, digital versus print revenues. I share what's going on in media to draw a line to education. And while you might say I'm being hyperbolic, and while it's become an increasing cliche to say so, I have no doubt that K-12 education has arrived at a truly spectacular moment in time. America's leaders and much of the public have come to realize an education system born in the industrial age can no longer effectively serve students in a complex, rapidly changing information age. The world is changing at a startling rate, propelled by technology and fueled by intimate interconnectedness of a competitive global economy. So to be prepared for the 21st century, for what the 21st century will bring, students need to be armed with relevant knowledge, all the stuff we've been hearing about, and new sets of skills and capabilities that allow them, and this is echoing this morning, think creatively and critically, adapt to and thrive in a rapidly changing environment, devise new solutions to novel problems, leverage technologies not yet conceived, work collaboratively, and communicate clearly and with purpose. My argument on this, or my take on this, is that in general, way less so in Kentucky than in other places, education has been noticeably absent from the forces bringing innovation and change to sectors throughout the U.S. economy. But that's changing. Changed here a while ago, but you get my drift of the big picture. K-12, I would say, is poised to rethink a century-old system of schooling and to embrace a new generation of policies, programs, and products that could lead to disruptive as well as sustaining change. Okay, I'm going to tick off some reasons I think that's the case, and these will echo what Jean said earlier. I think some of this change is being spurred by agreement that all students need to be college and career ready to succeed in today's interdependent, fast-changing world. Number two, advances in our understanding of how learners learn and the power of data and analytics to leverage more meaningful student engagement is spurring a lot of this change along. Personalized learning, the use of data. So too is our technological leaps in communications, networking, adaptive response that make deeper and personalized learning a reality. Policy developments, undeniably, at the federal, state, and local levels are also encouraging innovation and new approaches to teaching and learning. And finally, while it's the glass half full side of me speaking, I really do believe that the economic realities that we're all having to deal with have forced us to think outside the box and embrace more efficient and productive models that can support enhanced student learning and break down traditional notions of time and space. So let me switch gears and talk a little more specifically about the issues that bring us all here today, which is teacher education, of course. In June, Education Week published an extremely compelling commentary by an assistant professor of secondary education in the SUNY system. I love the headline that one of my colleagues put on the piece, Teaching Toward Utopia. And I think her piece echoes many of the sentiments I've already tried to express. Her name's Julie Gorlutsky. I don't know if anybody knows her, but here's a quote from Julie. One of the greatest challenges for teachers in preparing students to live in, ideally to succeed in, a world that does not yet exist. That's pretty, that's... In a democracy, teachers must prepare students to participate in the creation of that world. As teacher educators, we seek to prepare our students to prepare their future students for this approaching reality, a world that they must imagine and construct simultaneously. Teaching future teachers, like standing in a mirrored room, is endlessly reflective. She continued, it's both fascinating and terrifying. This work involves more than transmission of content. It requires commitment to a future we cannot fully envision. It requires commitment to the people in front of us, materially and metaphorically. She goes on to make several other points, including that a democratic society needs participants who think critically and act ethically, and that teacher educators must model those characteristics. It's not enough to be compliant policy implementers, she says. Teacher educators must critically evaluate policies, advocate for their students and their future students, and work within the system to effect change. And this is one final quote from Julie. If we want teacher candidates to experience the discomfort of self-evaluation, we must suffer along with them. If we expect teachers to create a better world, we must foster imagination. We must push them so they will know they can fly, but we need to abandon our parachutes and leap too. Soaring together, we can imagine a future where all learners flourish and fly. So each summer, the editors of Education Week spend an intense couple of days evaluating hundreds of story ideas generated by the newsroom, and we set priorities for the coming publishing year. It's not that that process obviously sets our course and, we don't veer from it, but it's a hugely, talk about being intentional, it's a hugely important moment in our work where we all just stop what we're doing and come together and think about what the priorities are in the field right now. And I pass along this view into our process or into our rhythm to underscore the point that we try to be deliberate and reflective in our decision making about what we cover, how we cover it, and ultimately why we cover it. In our most recent foray to map out these broad swaths of issues and trends deserving of special attention, we identified several. We highlighted, and I'm pleased that these have been echoed all day, we highlighted equity and demographic trends at the #1 position on our list, including the rise in child poverty rates, and I will assure you all, rural education is right in that wheelhouse for us. We identified issues related to assessment, measurement, and accountability, not surprising, for educators, for students, for systems, for schools. And we identified the changing face of the American school district, a little less relevant in Kentucky than it is in many other states where the school districts are really undergoing profound changes in the way they're governed and financed. A few others, implementation of college and career ready standards, of course, that's the Common Core in most states. And Jean referred to this, the polarized debate raging among policymakers and practitioners about what the future course of K-12 education should be. It's ugly out there. It's really, really ugly out there. And Jean sometimes is in the bullseye, and sometimes, I can't believe I'm saying this, it's like I'm on the couch, and sometimes I'm in the bullseye, only to the extent that if you write about these things, you somehow must be in cahoots with people who are trying to bring evil forces to a public education. And I've been called really nasty names in public settings and online. So what's missing from my list of what wait, I had a couple of others. The unsettled financial picture is still a trend that we're following very closely. The notion of pathways beyond high school, CTE was mentioned. We certainly care about the linkage between K-12 and higher ed as well, and then big data. So what's missing from my list, you ask? At least one issue that brings us here today. We've been committed to reporting on teachers and teacher effectiveness since Education Week was launched in 1981. Even more specifically, we've been particularly attentive to the intersection of teacher quality, teaching quality, and student achievement, and its impact on student achievement. So here's our shorthand conclusion, something you all live every day. Despite the widespread recognition that high-quality teaching matters more to student performance than anything else schools do, most experts really believe, I don't say this in a meaning to be negative per se, that the current system for recruiting, deploying, developing, and retaining talent in the nation's classroom is broken. That's particularly true when it comes to our most vulnerable youngsters. Low-income and minority students are far more likely than their more well-off white peers to be taught by teachers who are inexperienced or who lack majors in their subjects. So researchers have looked at comparative practices in other sectors, in the business world and otherwise, at human resource kind of practices. And they found that at every juncture, education comes up short in terms of having a real human resources, human capital development system. Public school teachers on average have lower academic skills than other college graduates. New teachers are routinely left to sink or swim, present company accepted, and most earn tenure after the first few years on the job regardless of their performance. If they're particularly capable, and many are, it hardly matters. In most school districts, there is no career path to identify, nurture, and reward the most effective teachers so they can remain in the classroom. The problem, one education pundit has said, this all comes from, in-depth reporting we've done, so I'm not just kind of throwing a bunch of stuff out there. It's not that education has the wrong human capital system to meet its needs, it's just that we don't have one. So such a state of play has spurred us to keep constant tabs on state and district efforts to improve the teaching profession by increasing accountability, by providing incentives for talented people to enter and stay in teaching, by monitoring out and allocating the distribution of talent, and by building the capacity of teachers and principals to improve student learning. So this year, more specifically on that list that I am now finishing, we dedicated ourselves to chronicling what we're calling a new era for teacher preparation. So why? I have some notes here about CAPE. I'm not going to read them, but CAPE, right, has just come out with all of its new way of thinking about accreditation of education preparation. They've been called gutsy standards. They have the potential, some have said, to really spur a cultural shift in teacher education. And I know about some of the work here in Kentucky, at least, of increasing grade point average to get into programs, and I guess there have been some added student teaching requirements. So that you guys are way ahead of the curve again. So we're on the case too. Kentucky's on the case. Education Week's on the case. Beginning late last year, we started a series that we're calling Teaching the Teachers. If you haven't seen it, I'd encourage you to check it out. In it, we're examining some of the opportunities and obstacles faced by teacher colleges as they work to upgrade their training, with a particular emphasis on how education, teacher education is structured and regulated. Yeah, my colleagues are all wonks too, I will tell you. So we've published 4 installments so far. The first looked at teacher education programs that are taking more care in picking and guiding what have come to be called cooperating teachers, I heard that word earlier, in an effort to improve the student teaching experience. Our second story in this series reviewed state data and found the number of teachers being prepared at the elementary level outstrips current jobs. It's an interesting supply and demand issue going on even more generally than elementary level. The third examined programs that train aspiring teachers for the classroom through practice. We heard great examples of that this morning. And the fourth took a look at state efforts to raise the entry bar on teaching programs, even as there's worry, and legitimate worry, about the prospects for Black and Latino students or candidates. So separate from the news series, and sometimes issues can become even more vivid through places where opinions are more explicitly shared. So we've taken this issue on in our commentary section as well. We have this new feature in the commentary section called, I think this is a clever name, Op Education. It's a kind of online marketplace of ideas, as I've already said, and we asked 6 writers to weigh in on this topic. We gave them the statement: teacher preparation has been a hot topic for years in the education community, but now more than ever, the nation seems focused on teacher quality and performance in the classroom. How well are teacher education programs preparing future teachers? What elements are essential for the successful preparation of novice teachers entering the classroom? It's a terrific compilation. People come from different points of view, they ring different bells, but I really think it makes for a fascinating read. They're quite short, the 6 essays. There's also a place on edweek.org in the commentary area, the opinion area, where we've pulled a bunch of related commentaries on teacher preparation and teacher training together. So since I'm from Washington, I figure it's also worth noting that we're all wondering, I don't know if you all are, but what the reauthorization of the Higher Education Act, forget NCL or ESEA, nobody thinks that's going to happen forever, but HEA is moving. And we know that there will be many proposals put forward on how the revised law should be, or how the law should be changed. So just this week, some of you may have seen, the Education Trust released a set of recommendations that focuses on the HEA's teacher preparation accountability provisions. So we know that HEA requires each state to come up with a way of designating programs that are are at risk or low performing. Programs with low ratings can, under federal law, lose federal financial aid if the state subsequently lose financial aid if the state subsequently withdraws its approval from those programs. Needless to say, nobody does that. The problem is that the law doesn't require states to act in this way, and few, if any, ever have. So in other words, Education Trust says the federal designations don't amount to much without more teeth. The closest the system has come is an Education Department proposal to disallow low-performing programs from offering Teach Grants, a program that subsidizes coursework for applicants and who agree to teach in high-need fields and schools. The Education Trust would essentially expand that provision to all the major financial aid programs. That's a big deal because of the amount of federal funding that flows through colleges through aid programs. I don't need to tell you all that. Under the Education Trust recommendations, current students enrolled in programs that get low designations could continue to receive financial aid, but the program would not be permitted to offer it to new students coming on board unless it improved. It's a safe bet to say the higher ed lobby in Washington is mobilizing to fight this, and maybe some of you would be against that. There's going to be tension over this, to say the least. Many of Ed Trust's other recommendations for HEA align with policy developments already occurring in the field, such as requiring programs that prepare teachers to be more selective and take student outcomes into account. All the stuff I've been hearing about today, it's great. And as already noted, CAPE recently approved standards to this end, so some of that infrastructure is getting put in place. And the U.S. Education Department's forthcoming teacher prep regulations, which at this point have been delayed for nearly a year, are also expected to include provisions that address some of these shortcomings. So I am going to wrap up. Oh, I didn't bring it up, but I was going to mention our work on quality counts. There was a release that Gary, I think the governor's office put out, not only about the graduation rate, but it did note that in quality counts, something Education Week publishes, Kentucky broke into the top 10 in terms of having indicators of state policy that based on evidence and the smartest people who we tap to get our kind of framework in the way we think is helpful to the field, that Kentucky is ranked 10th in the country now with its state policies and outcomes. So good on you. So Kentucky, and indeed the nation, has been generally making tracks on a school reform path for at least a quarter century. So what's the key, after all my yibbity-yabbity, that I think to making continued progress? I think it comes down to having that expansive vision, having systemic strategies, public will, and stick-to-itiveness. I think it's been a recipe for success in Kentucky, and I think it will continue to be, and I think more and more states and communities across the country are recognizing that that's the recipe as well. So thank you all very much for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here, and I'd love to take a few questions. Yes, ma'am.
I do read Education Week, and I saw an article in there, I think about 3 weeks ago, regarding, they had a big pie chart of the Common Core and how it's being implemented. And only about 28%, I think 28% responded that they had only had 1 hour to maybe 3 hours of training or information on the Common Core across the United States. And what do you attribute the lagging behind? And what's going to be done, or how are we going to affect change if it's not consistent?
I'll try to be quick so we can get lots of questions. But I think that reflects what my general understanding is. I get around a fair amount, and it's really pretty scary what the districts and states, so let's start at the state level, and then districts are doing to prepare, for all of this. Part of it is state education departments have been decimated over the last however many years, so there's just not that much capacity there. And while people point fingers at, certain funders, foundations, underwriting certain work around implementing Common Core, it's a drop in the frickin' bucket for what is needed for the system. So, the idea that somehow there's like some big, guiding arm making sure all this comes together it's a specious way of thinking. I couldn't agree with you more. I think there's a ton of people and efforts underway to try to figure out how to address that very issue. Some of it, guided by some of these foundations for sure, but there are beacon states, and Kentucky's one of them. And people are, the U.S. Ed Department has got high stakes in this too, not in I would say not in an inappropriate way, but trying to be helpful. And, a lot of it's about sharing information, I think. And certainly we're trying to help with that. Lots of other people are too. We're not ready. We're not ready for this across the country. And what we're really not ready for is when the test results are going to come out. And it's just going to torpedo so much of what's been, good work has already been underway.
And what about our Secretary of Education? Where
How's he viewed?
Yeah, in all this, and helping across the nation get the Common Core.
You're talking about Terry?
Uh-huh.
He is incredibly well regarded and is out a lot as a helpmate in this effort. you know, the whole lessons learned kind of way of thinking about all of our work. You know, again, that panel this morning, I kept thinking, gosh, you know, I feel like we don't all have to reinvent things every time we tackle something. In publishing, I'm not going to say I'm going to build the back end of a, you know, digital distribution system. I'm going to go figure out where the best place is to get that. So I think Terry's part of what's happening to get out and engender both enthusiasm but also share actual content or, you know, substantive knowledge. I don't know. It's a tough time out there. I'm generally optimistic, but I don't know how this hand is going to play out.
We've been so entrenched in it in the last 3 years, and then to pick up the magazine to find that, you know, you think you're leading and everybody's following, and then people aren't behind you doing what needs to get done to make sure it's implemented.
Well, the Chiefs, the organization that Gene Wilhoit used to lead, is, you know, feels like it's going to hold this together, you know, with the other chiefs in the other states. As Gene said, a few states, you know, it looks like might drop out, but and you know why? The business community has been mobilized and truly believes it. I'm not saying in a kind of precious kind of way. The business community, I mean, as Gene said earlier, when these standards were developed, went to higher ed and the employers to say, what do these standards really need to be? And how are we going to, you know, roll these out? And now when the hard work of implementation is going on, business well, there was even something last week, right? Or was it earlier this week? Last week. The Chamber of Commerce, you know, folks all coming to the White House and getting a little talking to about, you know, how they need to step up and do better at, you know, holding this all together. But there are a ton of high-profile corporate and business people who are, you know, waving the flag for this. And more than waving the flag. I don't mean to make it sound not consequential. Anybody else? I probably failed that answer.
More questions?
Come on. Come on. Yes, ma'am.
I work at the Education Professional Standards Board, the people who bring these people lots of regulations about things like GPAs and test scores that make some people happy and some people not so. But they've worked really, really hard to adjust to a whole lot of new expectations, and some of our smaller private institutions are really, really feeling the pinch. What they're not getting, I don't think, is much credit for all the work they're doing. I think we lack messaging strategies. Could we tap into your media savvy for a moment and ask how to do a better job of getting out the message about what we do? Because I agree with you, nationally, Kentucky, woo, we're the big stars, and I think here everyone feels a little bit beaten up and unappreciated, quite frankly.
Thank you. And that is the same all over the country, right?
Yeah.
I feel for you. And some of the capacity building that's going on now to implement Common Core and standards is actually around this messaging and positioning kind of work, with the thought that, you know, if better information gets out and the storyline, as people like to say in Washington, the narrative is, I hate that, by the way, that the storyline is a more, you know, accessible and kind of affirming way of telling that story. So I couldn't agree with you more. I tell you, my advice, and I'm asked to speak on communications a lot, is not to worry about communications intermediaries, but do it yourself. And, you know, everybody's a publisher now. Everybody has the digital tools to get information out. Be intentional about it, of course. Think about who your audience is. An organization called the PI Network, Policy Innovators in Education Network, whether you like them or not, has done some really exciting work to think about what those messages need to be. And it turns out, and this won't surprise you, but it even hit me, is that the messages that we all would carry to business people would be different from the messages that you use for parents, which are different from the messages you use for practitioners and educators within the enterprise. So business people really do care about having prepared employees, right? And the whole international competitiveness theme plays well with them. Parents don't care about that, according to the polling. They just want to know their kid has opportunities. So immerse yourself. It's not hard. Not you, I'm saying. Any of us needs to immerse ourselves in available. We don't have to reinvent. There's a lot of stuff that's been published. Frameworks Institute, PINet Network, around this idea of how we position this. All these big changes coming to K-12 education. And I couldn't agree more. And I try to be really careful in my own remarks to be affirming and supportive of, all of this, because it doesn't do anybody. I know what it takes to change an organization. EPE is 100 people, and and I think that was a question this morning. It's a whole lot easier to change and move smaller organizations than it is really big ones. So to the extent that's an advantage, that's great, but change is hard. Anyway, I know I'm not very...
I hope they're listening, because I want them to get their messages out about all the good things they do. And, as a state entity, we can't advertise on your behalf. We can talk about your good work, but we have to be careful. So, talk it out, right? Talk yourself out.
And get people to carry those messages for you, if that makes sense, so that, when Ed Week has been attacked, not a lot, but some over the past years, being in the pocket of, I don't know, name one of the conspiracy, people. We were advised, we sought some media, advice, and we were told, do not engage in that argument yourself. Get other people who respect the work you do to speak on your behalf. I thought that was, great advice. Your alums, the practitioners you all have already out in the field. Think about what a very concrete way of mobilizing that asset would be.